The following is a conversation with the artist Sarah Long, who takes up the position of the girl or girlishness to obfuscate archetypes such as mother or woman or even artist in the delivery of words and paint that are both playful and contrarian. I'm also going to take this opportunity to read out the text that Sarah uploaded to discuss, alongside an image of the media personalities Jedward, who represented Ireland at the Eurovision in 2012. Here it is. I hope you enjoy. Dad got a thing into his head about flags a while back. He wasn't going to let them dictate what the flag meant. Who they were was unclear. Various groups were implicated: extended family, a man down the pub, who perhaps instigated the initial disagreement, the English, of course. He began to insist that the tricolour was enough to spook the guards into putting you on some kind of RA watch list. The latter belief was repeated at length, and it became clear, in spite of the unclear reasoning, that by now he was utterly compelled to do something in protest. We would have to fly a flag outside our house in defiance. He had to make a stand. The trouble that he had procuring one only added to the conspiracy and of course to the drama of the whole thing, which seemed to be the main backdrop to my school day for a number of weeks. At last, a flag was flown outside the house, out by the gate. My brother was solicited to assist him one evening. The rest of us were left to look out the window, mouths hanging open like the gormless spectators he had reduced us to. He took great satisfaction in the bemusement of our neighbours, and particularly that of my uncles. To be a contrarian, you must know how and when to revel. It is a moral obligation. Every comment was music to his ears, every look of exasperation a triumph. Ah, but of course contrarians breed contrariness, so whenever anyone asked about our new garden feature, the postman, a friend, a nosy delivery driver, we wouldn't enter into a conversation about what Irishness meant in our current post-colonial climate. Instead, we would stress that Dad was expressing his passionate support of Jedward, the Irish act at Eurovision that year.
Yeah, I feel similarly. It's exciting when you're like, oh yeah, I want to take part in that, and then just beforehand you're like, why should I say I do this? Yeah.
So the way I usually do this is that I start with your text and also with the image you uploaded. And do you remember the image you uploaded? Yeah.
Yes, it was Jedward. It was an image of Jedward just pulled from the internet, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually people are very artists are very self-conscious about the images they upload, about their own work or whatever, and it usually is very aesthetic and it's very considered, the tonal range, etc. But your image kind of stood out as an image that, its tonal range, all that kind of stuff is behind it really, and it's this image. I might just describe it because this is an audio, so. It's of Jedward, and those who don't know Jedward, I know Jedward. I knew them actually immediately when it popped up. They're kind of I suppose they were around over 15 years, 13 years ago, something like that, when they represented Ireland in the Eurovision. And they're twins, and they're kind of media personalities. I think they were an X Factor or something before that, maybe. And the in Ireland anyway, they became a big presence on TV, especially. Um, and the images of the two of them, usually they're always pictured this way. The two of them, heads conjoined in a certain way, and they're wearing this. Their hair is kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's not a it's kind of shooting upward, and they have kind of highlights of blonde in probably originally dark hair, very clean shaven. I say they're in their 20s here, are they? Maybe, or yeah, like just very clean. And then they're wearing these jackets. I don't know if they're bomber jackets, but they have flames on them. Red flames with yellow, kind of a yellow outline. And they're in some kind of maybe a bedroom or something like that. So yeah, that's it. So maybe talk us through the image. Why? Oh well, the thing is, it relates to the text. And just one thing about the text, I think the text was just beautifully written. The minute I read it, um, I kind of, I was kind of jarring in a way because the text is so considered in a way, and then the image is kind of going against that a little bit, you know. But it's kind of Jedward is mentioned at the bottom of the text, and I didn't know whether to read this out because I'm really conscious actually because I've been listening to some of your work, the spoken word, and I listened to an interview with you as well, and I went to see your show down in Tipperary Arts Centre, and I heard the piece there, and I read the little pamphlet in that show, and then I read the book you gave me at Triskel Arts Centre. I read that yesterday, in full because it was just raining here. So it was actually great because I just sat down and just read straight through it. And I got a real sense of the way in which you speak, just the rhythm of your voice. Now, for me to read this out, I'm just going to be monotone, really. But for your voice, kind of goes up and down. It's kind of, it's not sing song, but it's kind of it has inflections here and there, and it relates to your spoken word, I suppose, and your written word. They're kind of together in one way. So maybe I don't know how to approach this. Maybe just talk about the image first, and then we go into the text. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess there's like two kind of things going on in picking the image. Because yeah, it relates to the text and kind of like the content of the text, but also I guess just my relationship to images in general. Like I am like a painter largely. So, but I don't want to like submit an image of my painting because that just didn't feel very exciting or feel very like true to my relationship to images. And yeah, I kind of thought it'd be more interesting to think about like how I actually like came to be interested in image making, and I think it maybe had more to do with like collecting images and collecting kind of like little fragments of things in like kind of a magpie way. Like I guess like being creative when I was younger didn't mean like I was gonna sit down and like paint something. It would have been like I was like ripping stuff out of magazines or like cutting out around like newspapers, and like the Sunday World, just like cutting around all the celebrities and just like putting them into your little notice board and that. So I think that's like my main relationship with images in that way. I never really wanted to like I never had an I never had like an inclination to like photograph something myself or to make the image myself. It was always about like receiving images and kind of like collaging them together and manipulating them. And I still kind of feel like that's maybe my approach, that there's a little bit of a distinction between I not to sound like really woo-woo, but like I feel like I'm like a receiver of images rather than like a that I'm like manifesting something new or creating something new. I feel like I'm just like kind of arranging or fixing together different imagery that I've like received. but yeah, and so I guess that was kind of like the the kind of like the dread of it all was that like the images that you get or that kind of like stick with you are these kind of ones that are they're obviously like a strange looking duo, and that like I guess that's the kind of like imagery that I maybe would have uh grown up with more than necessarily like art images, or whatever that means. But yeah, and I think then like towards like the maybe more thinking about like the content of it, like I'm kind of drawn toward these figures and they kind of come up in my writing in particular, but also like in different ways in the painting. These kind of like figures that like kind of transcend their form or their body and they kind of like point towards different maybe moments of like kind of I guess kind of moments of Irish culture, and they kind of like all like different narratives all kind of combined together in the one person. And I guess that kind of relates to the idea of like the collective unconscious, or this kind of idea of like receiving an image. Because I think yeah, I think with with gender, like the particulars of them would be like they make you think of like they're always like performing national identity, which is kind of like talked about a little bit in the text, but um that like even when they're on the X Factor, it was they were the Irish act, and then they obviously represented Ireland at the Eurovision, but they were kind of like these strange kind of like boy band characters, and obviously Ireland has a relationship to boy bands, and it was kind of like they were kind of like gone too far, like oh, this like boys and boy bands look identical, but then they are actually identical, and then they're kind of like a very heightened version of it, and like a very yeah, I guess like they're right after like the bailout, and they're like Ireland has a weird relationship to Europe at this time anyway, and they have like the kind of Celtic tiger blonde hair. So I just think there's like loads going on in them, as like a kind of like not a symbol, but like as like this kind of uh yeah, like cultural moment. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense because when I was reading your text in your book, you use this term magpie. It kind of reminds me of Warhol a little bit. I'm going to reference art history, but like Warhol was kind of a receiver of imagery. Like he's in his studio. There's video footage of him on the floor painting or screen printing or whatever it is, and he has a radio on. Has magazines all around him, and he's just receiving imagery, and then he's kind of putting it back out into the world in a different form. But it's not. It does become his style in a certain way, but it isn't in a sense. He's not projecting himself as an artist in the sense that he's just collecting culture all around him and then projecting it back out into the world. So my dog is barking its head off there. Give me a second there. I have a greyhound and there must be someone at the door. Ah, my dog. It must be in the postman or something. Yeah, no, going back, I suppose the text is so important to this because I mentioned earlier about this text and it refers to your dad hanging flags. And there's a kind of complication in a sense that, can you tell the story a little bit about this scenario? And is this a real scenario?
It's a heightened version of well, like we do have a flag outside our house, but it's kind of like a heightened version of maybe his kind of approach to nationality, maybe, or yeah, I like. Sadly, my dad passed away last month, so I'm gonna try and not get too like eulogizing and about him. But yeah, so I'll try and like stay on the kind of like I think I guess thinking about the idea of like receiving images and like and that Warhol thing that you were mentioning, I think like there's I guess I would say that there is some kind of criticality happening then in like in kind of like how I decide to like fiction them together afterwards, or like because like when I'm painting it's the idea like landscape as well, and then in the writing it's like kind of more these fragments. So there is like kind of a criticality happening and like a choosing and of exactly how to fiction it together. And I think this text in like describing the different ways that like my dad is considering the flag as being red or not red or whatever, I think kind of speaks to that, or that kind of like I like that one thing can have this have a different meanings ascribed to it, I guess. So yeah, but yeah, I that kind of notion of the idea of someone being contrary as well, I think is like important to my work as well. This kind of idea of, I guess, like standing in the heightened version of something, or like kind of like going very far on one side so that like you can see all sides of something. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, like you bring up that word contrarian. I have a close relationship to contrarian in the sense that, like, when I'm writing criticism or I feel that my writing is becoming critical, I become very, I'm going to use your word heightened. There's a kind of sense of, I don't want to call it anxiety, but there's a sense that I'm pushing past something that was once that could have been just quite passive, into something not aggressive, but something that is exaggerating the feeling around something. And I'm kind of wary of it a little bit. And I'm always questioning it as well, but it's a good feeling, but it's also a feeling that comes with a lot of, you wonder how your criticism or your contrariness affects other people out there, you know. So it kind of projects out from you into the landscape. So the other becomes really, I suppose you start to see yourself to other people when you start to, and you hear things back then, and then it becomes gossip, and all these horrible things start to emanate from this space of contrariness. Yeah, like, do you feel your work, like, I think there's a criticality in your work, actually, in the sense that, like, I have on my, can you see in the background here? There's a picture here, Susan Sontag. I have her screen printed on the back on my door. She meets me every day in the studio. Actually, she kind of glares at me. And she's a quiet contrarian in a certain way, because she's in this interview and she's talking about how she likes to take the dissenting position. Even though she may not fully believe in it, it does a feel like she'll always argue the other side. And then when I read your book yesterday, your novella, there's a kind of contrariness in it throughout, even to your use of language, like, that you'll flip back and forth. You'll use certain, your dialect, you'll use certain, like, curse words at certain points that kind of, you know, break through. You're talking about Irish society as well in a critical way. And you're also taking up this idea of the archetype, you know, the mother, and stuff like that. Do you feel your work, you know, when you're thinking, because I see a lot of artists out there taking this position, maybe around land, about Irishness, and also this, your use of the word girl or girlish. Can you talk a little bit, I suppose, a little about your dialect or the words you use to kind of get across what you're trying to get across visually or in words?
There's something about occupying the space of like a girlish voice, or that kind of like coming of age voice, that's which I'm obviously not, I'm 30, but like the text I kind of position myself as someone a little bit younger, or someone who has that coming of age voice that's like able to be like critical in a way that like holding Caulfield up, kind of just saying like, oh, like this, just having a really confidence and being like, this is what's wrong with the world or something, or like you kind of you remove yourself and you're kind of able to be a bit like spikier than you are if you're like, I'm an adult. So I like occupying that space. Like in a even just in a genderless way, it's interesting. I think like that kind of time period is like an interesting access into kind of like a critical voice that you can play with, that you can be a bit contrarian because you're kind of like excusing yourself a little bit. And then I think like in a gendered way then it's been like interesting to move into doing like spoken word stuff, or like to doing like performance in general, because yeah, like my own voice is something that I would have had like a big hang up around, because it is high pitched and not very like serious sounding, and like all those kind of things or whatever, and like what you like typically would associate like an authority voice with, or like an intellectual voice with, and that kind of became a big thing for me when I was like writing the novella like in a longer form, and tapping into this kind of like girlish voice and talking about this idea of kind of like expanding beyond like the borders of the page or beyond like particular forms. It just made sense that it would have to be also like a recorded voice, and that it would have to like occupy space in some way. Um yeah, and I guess this kind of idea of expansion is like important in the work, because yeah, I guess just to like I paint largely like landscapes, and I kind of relate it back in the novella to this kind of idea of like I guess like different female archetypes in Ireland, and how they're kind of all combined together in this like Mother Ireland figure, and how that can be more than one, that's kind of used for different agendas, for different at different moments, and like for different political reasons or different social reasons. But it kind of everything is kind of in the one figure. It kind of holds all these different multitudes, and I find that really interesting, that it's like one figure that can be used in all these different ways. And then I guess I was thinking a little bit like how woman is enshrined in the home, and women and mother kind of being used interchangeably in the Constitution, and this, I guess, seeing this like Mother Ireland figure as an invitation to be big and to occupy the entirety of the land and to occupy all these multiple perspectives. So that feels productive for me, but in like a conceptual sense, but also in like in a visual sense of like the the border of the canvas, and the idea of like the grid is like very generative for me in terms of thinking of like what patterns can happen within in a particular space. So like if it's like yeah, it's like saying if what if the confines of something dictate what happens inside it. So like thinking about that in terms of like identity and labels and that, but also just thinking about that like visually and like physically of like what can happen within the borders. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Good. No, I just, it's coming back to me, the relation to the grid, and you bring up Rosalind Krauss and people like that. So, and also Joan Didion, which I'll come back to later. But there was also something I want to talk about, and it's this idea. You're talking about this girlish voice, and you were kind of self-conscious about that. Um, like, what comes first for you? Like, are you writing? I'm just kind of curious about your process, because I've listened to like one of your video works, Tread Softly Because You Tread on My Dreams, and then I've read your book, and they're the same voice in a certain way. So your process, do you write and then speak, or do you speak or dictate and then write? Or
Yeah, so I guess like I'm trying to like maintain this character Mary, who's like a modern day Mother Ireland figure, and again like the idea of Mary being some in most women's name in some variation. It was also like Marion was like my dad's middle name, so I like the kind of like gender kind of like ness of it as well. But yeah, so I guess when I'm writing, I write first and then I would record something, but when I am writing it is like I'm speaking it to myself, or I'm like writing it like an address. So it does like I do hear the rhythms of it when I'm writing. So that like informs how it actually is on the page, but and then afterwards like recording um like with the novella that would have been a lot. I translated a lot of that into a radio play, and then I went back to the text to like take out bits that didn't have the same kind of rhythm. So the actual published piece was kind of informed then by it actually being a radio play before that. So there is like a kind of like it ties in, but it largely starts with the writing, but the writing is me speaking it to myself. Um, yeah.
And there was something else just came to mind about the first and the third person when you're projecting yourself out there. It was interesting the other day. I was giving a workshop in Gorey School of Art for writing artist statements or stuff like that, and someone brought up the whole thing about first and third person in artist statements. And I just randomly went to Laura Fitzgerald's website because I thought about the first person in relation to her. I just wanted to give an example on the hoof, really. But the website had changed a little bit in that it was interesting in that Laura had put up a kind of third person artist statement, which I was kind of shocked by in a certain way because I'd read her artist statements before and they were first person. But then she had a downloadable artist statement, which was kind of like autofiction. It was about house martins, but it was in the first person. So there's this kind of confusion around what was being projected out there into the world. So the third person was quite, I suppose, objective. It was the artist looking from on high on their work and what has happened over the last, whatever, recent years and what their work is about from a distance. Whereas the first person was very much more inside the work, a kind of confusion. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that the third person, because yeah, I suppose it's just a general question about third person and first person, and artists taking that position in relation to work.
Yeah, that's I didn't realize that Laura had changed it either because I love her artist statement that I knew that was on her website that I had read before. And I love Laura's work in general and I think she's really interesting. Um but yeah, I guess like the whole like process of the novella was kind of like this reflecting on what I had been making and reflecting on like the the character of the artist or like the kind of mythologizing of the artist and like in the prose it kind of like moves through different like identities or like these different kind of like like things. I don't know, like female artist or like the idea of like being like a waif or like a female intellectual and all these or like a complex female character and so kind of I like thinking about how things are perceived, I guess, and that like what kind of narrative can be put on something. So there's kind of like a contradiction in the text of it being like Mary's inner monologue, her like consciousness, and then this kind of like narration. And yeah, I guess like that kind of switch to it being about like a third person. I think it's interesting in my on my website I write like in the third person then though because I'm like want to be like serious so because I guess like so much of my other writing is just I don't know you're kind of like you want to signify that you know I don't know I guess to like to show that what you're doing in your writing is a choice, that you can do both, that you're being like, oh, this was like a decision to be like this in the text, has to be like, then the official thing has to go on it to be like, that was a decision then that I made rather than I just don't know any better. But yeah, I think the whole, I guess I just find it very interesting, the whole idea of like the mythology of an artist in general, and the kind of like, I don't know. I suppose because the book is set in like being someone in their like mid-20s or whatever, um I don't know, there's something about like artists' childhoods and stuff that like kind of can feed into like people's bios as well that I just find like a bit like icky, and yeah, there's just something like I don't like the over romanticizing of this happened and then that meant that I was an artist, or like I don't know. Yeah, because it's not something that I can relate to, I guess, or I don't want to relate to, but yeah.
I get, no, listen, I completely get you. Like, I remember when I started writing criticism for Circa, and I felt way more comfortable writing in the first person. Like, I felt this, because I don't know why, it just felt more comfortable. But I remember getting my first feedback from an editor, and they just say, get rid of the I, there's too many I's in there. And and I started to become really self-conscious about it, and then started writing the third person, but the I kept on coming in. And so it's just really, I think it's really interesting when artists either take those two different positions in terms of how they project themselves out in the world. And it's one thing in the book, and it comes back to Joan Didion. You bring up how like she's so cool. It actually got me to think about screen printing an image of Joan Didion, because I used her image actually for the art writing workshops in Gorey. I'm reading all her shorts and her white album and stuff like that, and just she's such a compelling and fierce writer in the middle of a storm of violence and other stuff, like just beautiful, brilliant. And your descriptions of her in dark shades and stuff like that, I was just kind of laughing out loud, because you were talking about the ickiness of the bio. Oh, I live here, or I live in the country, or I live in the city, or I live in Berlin, or whatever it is that you're projecting out there. And it's just funny that you use Joan Didion as something counter, kind of not vulnerable to that, Yeah, no, that's good. Going back to this idea of the girl or girlishness, and I was kind of thinking about this a lot when I was reading your texts, and I was thinking about the archetype. I know you talk about the archetype of the mother and Mother Ireland, and then you also mentioned somewhere the feminine archetype, and it kind of goes into Jung and psychoanalysis, because archetypes are, in psychoanalysis, especially in relation to Jung, they're kind of there that they've been preformed, or they're the essence of culture. And even though I don't read Jung that much, I read some of his followers, like people like James Hillman and stuff. And he talks about this Greek culture and archetypes, and he's always referring back to Greek culture and the essence of humanity and stuff like this. And I like how you kind of pull away from that and say you start talking about the shapeshifter, use this kind of idea of the shapeshifter, and how, and the girl, the kind of, let's call it an archetype of the girl. I was reading somewhere, I have this book, I use it for, there's some of the essays in it for a reading list. And it's called Girls, Girls, Girls in Contemporary Art. And it's really good because it's a lot of photographers in it, but they are mainly female artists. And they're using the girl as an archetype, as a kind of resistance. So it's like what you said there, that and it goes back to, I suppose, Simone de Beauvoir and the second sex and stuff like that. There's a kind of trajectory of womanhood or girlhood towards being a woman. And it's mad how Freud talks about how the girl doesn't exist. It's kind of asexual. And I think he says somewhere, I think I read this somewhere, that the little girl is a little man or something like that. It's masculine or something. Now, Freud says some bizarre stuff, especially of his time, but there's something interesting in the idea of the girl or taking that girl position as a form of resistance towards all those things that are expected of, as Beauvoir says, the second sex. Like this idea, there's always this invisibility in terms of, it's like the great, behind every great man, there's a great woman. All these cliches that like the man is visible, the woman's behind, but she's good. She's good anyway, you know? And I was just thinking about this, like the good enough mother, and or the bad girl. You know, these kind of juxtapositions of. So, can you just elaborate on that a little bit, or have I said too much?
There's like a quote in by Claire Louise Bennett in her novel Pond, and I'm a massive fan of her writing. I think she's amazing. And there, she's talking about yeah, it's at the very start of Pond, and she's kind of talking about like it seems to be like a childhood memory, but whenever seems to talk about being a child, she used like the we pronoun, so you kind of get the idea that there's like multiple personalities happening. And she says there's like a line that I just really love. It's like, "Oh, we were just little girls then on the cusp of female individuation," which I think is just fascinating, and like it's just such a fantastic little line that you're like, oh, that like feels like something you could like mine for the rest of your life. Because like, yeah, it does feel like that. It's that idea of like as a child having like lots of different possibilities open to you, and before the idea of like becoming a woman, whatever that means, happens, that like there's like this, yeah, like multiple possibilities, the kind of idea of like being a shapeshifter, that you could move in between these different identities. And I just really, yeah, like obviously I was talking about using the I, but I think the idea of using like we to describe like being a girl is just like so interesting. Because obviously it like ties into kind of an idea of like a sisterhood, but also just the idea of like multiple selves. And then I guess that was something I was trying to explore in the writing as well. And then the idea of Mother Ireland being multiple selves. But yeah, I think like as someone who is turned 30 this year and isn't like I don't know who likes who struggles to be like that, to be like that I'm like a grown woman is just, it doesn't feel, I don't know, doesn't feel right to me. So I guess that's just something that like I struggle in my work in general, and in my life in general, I guess. But that, I don't know, there's just a close relationship with mother caring that I think is very interesting. And I think it's there in a lot of people's work. I was having some very like nice conversations with Isabel English, who's like a sculptor based in Dublin as well. Who's also kind of like looking at the idea of like girl as being this in-between stage and kind of wanting to stay in that in-between stage, or kind of being yeah, that there's something liminal, I guess, to use a fancy art word. There's something, there's something in that of like feeling more fluid, feeling more like more possibility. Um, yeah.
There's a story, like I was thinking about your work in terms of dreams, because when I went to Tipperary Arts Centre and I looked at other stuff online, especially that work I mentioned about treading on your dreams softly. There's something I was thinking about, like free association. Sometimes when I'm reading your writing, it feels that you're very fluid and free to, as you say, magpie the world, but and then put it all together in one. And it's it's great because the voice is consistent, but the references aren't. So you're not referencing art history. You're not using the fancy art words. You're using a particular dialect. You're like setting up a sentence with so or well. You know, you're kind of using that kind of Irish phraseology that I can really associate with. And so there's this story. I remember I was listening to an interview with Adam Phillips, whom I bring up a lot here, actually. I've kind of been reading a lot of his stuff. But in recent years, he's been way more open, maybe as he gets older, talking about age. But he's made way more open personally about his work as a psychoanalyst. And he's really interesting in terms of language as well, writing essays and stuff like that. But he talks about how when he first trained, he's only in his early 20s, and he went in to talk about his dreams. Because as a practicing psychoanalyst, you have to do your own therapy. And he went in to this therapist who was very famous, and he started just talking about his dreams, what he had, what he dreamt last night, as if that's what you're meant to do. He didn't know what to do really. But anyway, his therapist kind of caught him by the ear, because back then you could do stuff like that, I suppose, and said, "Mr. Phillips, don't say anything unless you're going to say something interesting." And he'd been talking about half an hour, and he completely stopped talking, because this, I suppose, a fear then of like, what's interesting. He thought he probably was saying interesting things. So when you're writing, and like there has to be a self-consciousness there about what you're saying and what you're speaking to about the world. Do you ever find when you've written something that it's good, or it's fun, or it's, how do you get past that thing where, oh shit, like who's going to be interested in this?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, because when you hear like writers talking about the process of writing, sometimes like people make it sound very laborious. And I don't really relate to that all that much. Like I do find like if I have the momentum to write, like it feels very like exciting. And then it feels like I'm getting to the bottom of something, or that I'm resolving something. And I always have the idea that I'm talking to someone, whether it's like myself or to somebody else. So I think, and it's funny because I was having this conversation with somebody as well recently, and they're like, I think you think about the audience too much. And I was like, I don't think that's possible, but I want to be engaging, and I think there is yeah, I studied in Glasgow, and one of our lecturers was Stephen Sutcliffe, and he was talking about how like he always wants to be able to like show his like brother and his dad what he did. And I feel I quite like relate to that, of like um I want it to be an address to people that I know, and that I know obviously there's like art that like isn't that, but I think that is what my impulse is to like is to address to the world around me. It's like it's trying like a point of connection, I guess. So I guess in when it comes to being like, oh, is this interesting or not? Um I guess it feels like whether it's like something that you would say to someone in conversation or not, because I like it to be to feel conversational, and because it's not like I paint way more than I write, and so when I do write, it feels like it's like a compulsion, and it's not like I'm sitting down to be like, oh, I better write something now, and like, do I have anything interesting to say? It's like I'm like, oh, I feel like I have something to write now. So I don't feel like I question. Maybe I should question more whether it's interesting or not. But I feel like because it's conversational, then there is just something that kind of like hopefully pulls you in, and that's the idea of the girl voice as well, is they're quite manipulative, I guess, because it's like kind of like it's what we're used to reading the diary voice in, and that, and it's like it's kind of like needy and like understand me. So I like that as well, that it's like a fun place to occupy. Yeah.
It's funny what you say there, because I have a young daughter, and the way she communicates in terms, in contrast to my son, is very different. The way she uses language, I wouldn't say she's manipulative, but I would say that, in that, for me as a man who's quite, I feel at times, I don't want to use archetypes, but I feel I'm very straight in a certain way, that she comes at me from the side a lot of the time, and I don't know. There's always a double meaning or double edge to what she's saying, which I find compelling, like really interesting. So there's kind of, yeah, the use of language is interesting. Painting. So painting is something you do mostly, is it? And is like, so there's two, like when I saw your work in Tipperary, like there's language, there's installation, there's painting. It's all together in one space. So how do you bring those together? Like thinking about reading you yesterday, and you're talking about being in your studio, and there's a lovely way in which you describe your body in relation to the paintings or the act of painting, like lying on the floor prostrate and being close to the paintings, being up close. Can you talk about that? Because it's very different language to writing. Because I was a painter. I went to art school to become a painter, but I exited as an installation artist and then a writer. Like I kind of left painting behind. So how do you go into those two different modes of making? Because they're so different, or are they for you?
Yeah, I think I was like afraid of bringing them together for ages, or like particularly because like the voice is kind of like is quite playful, and then the paintings are like can be read as quite straight, or like quite like you're yeah, like you don't want them to pollute each other or something. But then I'm like, they're all coming from me, so they do exist together. And I guess so that was kind of like a contradiction for ages of like what to do with the writing, what to do with the work. And then also like you get like that question of like which one are you, and blah blah, blah, and which one do you prefer better and stuff like that. And that's like very frustrating, because I think there's a tendency as well, like to kind of just pretend that like artists don't write, and that's like not a tradition, and like it is. Like, and sometimes you kind of feel like you're going crazy, where you're like, there's loads of people who write and make, but yeah, I think for me they both kind of are a bit, they tie together in different ways. I feel like they're both like a little bit kind of like collagey magpie, and then they're also both kind of ways of, well, like painting is very physical. It's kind of a way of expanding beyond your body in the same way that the voice is. That there's something like I have it like a thing in my head for now anyway, that I'm like, I don't want to paint the body. I don't want to paint the female form. I want it, like by painting the landscape, it's like an expansion beyond. And it's a way of like me leaving my body, even though it is physical and it is about being in your body, but it's a way of like expanding beyond the form of it. And that feels very like productive to me, and it feels more interesting, because I guess I guess it kind of comes back to this idea of like not valorizing the body, and not like like seeing it in, yeah, I don't like the idea of the single, I guess. And I think it's like quite like, to know this might be my own hangouts, but I think it's quite like a privileged thing to be able to use your body as an avatar or something. And that like that's not open to everybody for like lots of different reasons. And like, yeah, to be able to use your body as an avatar for an experience, I think is quite like privileged. So in a way, if that makes sense. And then so yeah, they connect to me because they're both ways of having they have humanity in them without being, they're bodily without being the body, and that's interesting to me. They're kind of like, yeah.
And like your paintings, like, because when I saw your work in Tipperary, the paintings were kind of enmeshed into all the other stuff. So the way I saw them was not as paintings as isolated objects, but very interconnected with all the other stuff in the space. Do you see yourself like, it kind of fits into the mode in which you think in terms of archetypes. So, oh, I'm a painter, or I'm a writer, and you're kind of resisting that all the time, or these kind of. So it makes sense in a way that you would kind of bring them all together in one. Do you see yourself showing work as a let's say, a painter or the painted works of Sarah Long or whatever, because the writing is contained within this book. It's this novella W. And so can your painting exist outside of those other things as silence? Kind of, because painting's very silent in a certain way. What do you think?
Yeah, so I guess like when I left college first, it was like I would only show paintings, and maybe sometimes there was wall text uh that would be kind of like poetic or something. I don't know. I was like, oh, maybe I can get writing in some ways, but I was like really cautious of ever putting like text into a painting, and that like I was like, that's bastardizing the painting too much, and like the painting has to be a painting on its own. Um, and then when I went, I guess I was always doing like writing alongside it, and I thought they would be separate forever. And I did like my master's, and even after have I did a master's in art writing in Glasgow, and then even after that, I had like the main part of the publication done, but I kind of thought they would still be separate, that would just be an artist publication, and then I would still have the paintings that were kind of informed by some of the ideas in the writing and the kind of ideas around the grid and multiplicity and Mother Ireland and that. But then I don't know at what point I was just like, oh, they kind of, I just want them to be together now. I just want them to be of the same space, and just to kind of like to grapple with it more of them all like living in the one space. So those works that were in like South Tipperary, I have shown them like out off that installations, and everything is like modular, so they can come away and be their own little thing in a different space, and I like that. I like that there is something there is something to the confines of the canvas still, that they can still be like their own little world. And in I don't know, there's like an idea that I like kind of like latched onto, of you know there's like Brownian motion, this idea of like particles and how they move in space. And so like if you like draw like a drawing of a hedge like around the outside of it, like that pattern echoes like micro patterns and macro patterns in the universe. And I like this idea that kind of means that we're suspended in a space. So that, I guess, that idea of being suspended in a space, being up against the border of something, is kind of like a thread that I pull through everything. So I'm like, that connects the paintings for me, that connects the voice for me, that connects the writing for me. That I'm like, there, it's about being up against something, that there's like a limit, and how does the limit dictate the patterns or behavior that happens inside, which sounds very abstract, but I feel like that feels productive, and that's like kind of what ties it all together for me. But at the same time, sometimes I'm like, maybe I've made a bad decision. Maybe I should have kept them separate as well, because they do, I think they work on their own as well. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird area, and I think not everyone responds to it in the way that you might hope as well. That like, there will be painters who will be like, just show your paintings, which is like, yeah, I don't know. But I don't know when I decided that I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna put them all together.
Painters are very serious about painting, and they're very critical of other painters. I say that out loud, but they are. Um, what I was going to say, like just talking about seriousness and fun, because when I'm reading your book, I'm having those laugh out loud moments, but I also feel there's something underneath it, like there's something serious in it. And like you bring up colonialism and like the land and stuff like that. Is this important? This idea of Irishness, and like colonialism, and even your own, I suppose, your own mode. You could say that appropriation is a kind of colonialism, in that you're kind of grabbing things around you and putting them back together. So it's all interconnected in a way, the way you're working. Are these important to you? Are these motivations? Or Like sometimes I ask painters, "Oh, why do you paint?" And they just say, "I get pleasure from it." You know, it's just the thing of putting things together. Forget about the meaning behind it. Are these because there is in the book, in your conversations, these things keep on popping up. Kind of the socio-political aspect of being an artist, being a woman, um, all that stuff, land ownership, whatever it is. Are these important? Are these, and especially in the text you submitted, it's there in that in an abstract way.
It is important, but maybe like that I'm interested, I guess, in like what's like in I guess I'm interested in the like ideas of like colonialism and like how it's like affecting us now, like how it might be like affecting you in very like minor ways, or like how it might be shaping you in some way. And I guess like going back to the idea of being suspended in a space, like this idea that we're in a box where like ideas are just like reverberating, or like things are repeating. So yeah, like I like seeing where like a story is actually just kind of like retelling itself, or like and I guess that's what I kind of meant in terms of like Jedward as well, like that idea um of a figure kind of like of like those stories kind of tying themselves and kind of repeating themselves around something. um so yeah, I think ideas of like Irishness are interesting to me, and like what might be shaping our, yeah, our collective unconsciousness together, I suppose. And I like analyzing that and kind of like being critical about that. And then I guess in relation to like to the painting, it's kind of like I don't know, it's kind of I take a lot of influence when I'm like painting the idea of the landscape of like different literary like influences, because I like seeing how like because we have such a tradition of like writing about the landscape, and also like writing the landscape as female in Ireland. And I think it's interesting how that shapes our actual perspective of our surroundings now, and how that like how from writing about it that changes how it actually is, like how it physically is, and like how we respond to it. So I don't know, there's something in that kind of a loop there, um, that I find interesting. I guess it's it's not that it's not serious, and it's not that it's playful, but I think it's like it's more like um I guess it's not like in an activist way of being like that's why I'm interested in it. I think it's more of like a observer way or something. I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of artists like Patti Smith and Joan Didion as well. Like there is a seriousness behind Joan Didion's writings, but when she's writing about the landscape in America in the 60s, there's something really poetic about how she writes about that landscape that isn't journalism as such, or, you know, reportage for a newspaper. It's something really beautiful to read. And this is the kind of, when I'm reading your stuff, I'm caught between these two spaces, in that there's a seriousness, there's a funness to it as well, and there's a kind of poetics to it. Like that's why I like the text, especially the text you uploaded in relation to Jedward, the Jedward image, in that there was a poetics in your text. It was very considered. It was very personal. Um, and then you had this kind of displacement in that it felt out of sync at first. But then when you start to sit with it, you kind of get it, if you understand the reference in a certain way. And the reference is Irish. You know, Jedward is, I know they were on X Factor and they did expand out from this island, but it is a real Irish moment at a particular time, around the recession and kind of weirdness. Because the way in which I usually do these conversations, I screen print the image that people upload. And I sit with it, and it was kind of weird going. I never knew I'd end up screen printing Jedward. So Jedward is sitting in my. They're looking at me here from. I'll show you later. They're sitting in here in my studio looking at me. And when I was screen printing it, I was trying to aestheticize it in some ways. I was trying to make it more arty because it's so explicit in its. And when you make it black and white, it does remove a bit of that from it. But it's interesting that, yeah, like it's very difficult to articulate when an artist does something of real quality. Because I'm a reader. I write. I like writing. I like good writing. And when I read that and then I'm hit with Jedward, it's just kind of jarring. You also gave me a word from your book that I'd never heard before, and it's actually a word that is related to a word, one of my favorite words, uncanny, and it's eldritch or eldritch, yeah. And it was interesting. I looked it up, and this was the definition, and it relates back to some of the things we've been talking about here. So eldritch is, and this is just an example of a sentence that uses the word eldritch. And here it is. And a woman whose voice had risen to a kind of eldritch sing-song turned with a skip and was gone. So that was the example. It was actually quite funny because I was thinking about how you the way you enunciate, both in your spoken and your written word. And it has this kind of sing-song quality that is quite carefree, and emphasis on free. Like, you know, it's that written spoken word that I really enjoy. And that's really difficult to do because a lot of people are concerned how a sentence looks or a paragraph looks, etc. This word eldritch, have you used that before? Did you know, because it means eerie, uncanny, strange, you know.
Yeah, I think I came across it in relation to landscape first, I think maybe. And I like it was kind of like a word that you kind of collect. 'Cause yeah, it does kind of capture something in the voice, I guess, that I'm trying to like get across. This kind of idea of like of spirit or some kind of like haunting or happening and yeah, I guess like because I kind of found this voice in particular when I was in Glasgow, and I think there was something about being removed from Ireland that obviously, it's like not a million miles away, but like that makes you like obviously see Irishism more. But I think, and then there's that thing about like references of like people getting them or not, and I think it's just not important to me. I think like for some reason the question of Irishness or that kind of experience is like is what's interesting to me, and I don't think I could like try and be like I want to have more universal references. So I because they just don't come and they just don't interest me as much. Like obviously like there's Joan Didion and there's like James Dean, but there's like relating them back to an Irish experience that I just feel yeah has something of like a kind of like a haunting nature or something. It's just what I like want to tap into and what I find most interesting. And I guess it's like what like that question of like what is it that you're like actually exploring or doing in that. But and I guess I'm not 100% sure, but it feels like I don't have an interest in trying to be more universal in that way. It's like yeah, it's about maybe I don't know. I think the collecting of words is nice because you're kind of like you find stuff that you're like, oh, that's useful, and I can put that in my bag to kind of like capture something that I'm not necessarily like, I don't necessarily know or can define, but like that's something that's helpful. So I can throw that out again like at a later stage.
Yeah, I feel like I don't want to explain any of this really. Like, I feel like we're touching upon something that, you talk about haunting and hauntology and all this kind of stuff to do with the land and the body. There's kind of this feeling of something transcendental that you're kind of always trying to, you talked about the grid earlier, but there's something that, like, the grid is kind of permeable, that you can move beyond it, in and out, and everything is kind of, even the way you describe yourself in the studio, like, against, the painting. There's something to do with landscape, um, and the body, but it's not explicitly about, you know, issues to do, activism, as you said earlier. It's way more transcendental, and poetic. And maybe that, like, I remember thinking about this before, like poets and painters, they're very close in a certain way, the way they look at the world. And the way in which you use language is quite poetic, and free. And you're trying to, I always love how poets sometimes contain the world in just a short sentence or a short line that's broken down. And that's just, Joan Didion can be beside Roy Keane, or, that kind of thing. They can be compressed together. Any other thoughts? I suppose I always kind of end these things with the artist talking about, influences, whether artistic, artists that they're interested in, or artworks, or any kind of cultural production that, that has inspired you along the way.
Well, I guess in terms of painting, I really respond to Kevin Mooney's work. I love this idea of like tapping into like an Irish history that's like unknowable, or like there's something really nice there, and I really love like how layered his paintings are and that. Yeah, and then I already mentioned Clarice Bennett, but I can't mention her enough because I just like find her work so exciting. And I like just did a like workshop with her, and she was so cool in person as well. So yeah, I think I guess they're two they're very like al alive or something. Like there just feels like there's great energy off them. And that feels exciting. And I guess it's like yeah, anything like yeah, like not to be abstract again, but like anything that I feel like has an energy that's like a little bit unresolved. I really like um and yeah, I guess in relation to like the text that I included as well, there's just something I will eulogize a little bit about my dad, but like there's something about like having kind of like that kind of energy where you're just like curious and like excited, I think. And that's yeah, I feel like that's something that I'm just like interested in, of maintaining a curiosity or something. Yeah.